afternoon and welcome to LVS Perspectives number 60, an audience with Patrick Foster. It's so lovely to have you back, Patrick. And we were just talking about how long ago it was, and it was pre-COVID.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me.
No, at all. You know, you've had a great morning this morning. You've been talking to all our pupils this morning, and I hear it's gone very well.
Yeah, I think so. They certainly look like they were listening.
Yeah.
But no, they've been brilliant.
Brilliant.
And it's so good to talk to so many different year groups as well. I think it's really important. So yeah,
it was actually lovely to see you face to face. I think last time we may have done this online. I think actually. So you know, I think you were amazed at our nice little studio here and how far we've come. So our parents obviously are watching live, and some will probably catch up tonight as well. And as always, parents, if you've got any questions, please put them through on the chat, because Patrick's going to give us a presentation, and then we'll go through any comments and discussion points then as we go. So Patrick, welcome back. Off you go. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks very much for listening, and whether it's live or later. I'm here to talk about something that's become my passion for reasons that will become very obvious over the course of the next 40 minutes or so. Some topics that are really important topics, so relevant in today's society. There's going to be two parts to this before Christine and I answer any questions. The first is I'll share with you a bit about my own personal story and journey. Is a very personal story. Some of the things that I talk about might be quite difficult to listen to, quite shocking, quite surprising, but there's a good reason why I do it. And then I'll go on to talk about why it's so important and what you can do to try and protect or help people around you, particularly young people in your care. So who am I? Why do I do this? What motivates me to share my story with a lot of people? I don't know. I'm actually a former professional cricketer. I was lucky enough to spend a few years as a full-time paid professional athlete living my dream. I'm also a former teacher. I spent 7 years in independent education teaching at schools like LVS. Knowing that I was that will probably shock and surprise you even more when you hear what you're about to. I also make no bones about it. I was very fortunate in my background, my education. I was given every opportunity in life you could possibly imagine. And one of the regrets I have to live with for the rest of my life is I didn't make the most of the opportunities that were given to me by other people. But the main reason I'm here, the main reason I do this is 5 years ago, I found myself in a situation that neither I or I think anybody else in the world ever expected me to be in. I was stood on the end of a train platform. I was seconds away from doing the unthinkable. I was about to end my life by suicide. The reason I was about to do that was I'd been battling addiction and mental health issues in secrecy for the best part of 13 years. In the main part, I had an addiction to gambling, an addiction that, like most addictions, starts often as a bit of fun with your mates. It can develop into a bit of a habit, can become a problem, and in the latter days it was an addiction. I had no issue whatsoever recognizing I had problems. It was pretty obvious from the things that I was doing, the situation I'd found myself in. My problem, like so many people, is I was too embarrassed and ashamed. I was so worried about what other people would say or think. I didn't know where to get help, and I honestly didn't think help was possible. And actually one of the motivations for me doing this is I don't want anybody to ever be in the situation that I was in. And sadly, it's happening far too much in the world at the moment, particularly, dare I say it, amongst young people. So just to give a bit of background and context about me, when I was younger, life was pretty good. I was at a boarding school. I had one real passion in life, and that was sport. I was pretty good at it. I played in all the major sports teams. I was a school prefect. I never got in any trouble, didn't do anything wrong. My teachers didn't worry about me when I was younger. My parents certainly didn't. I'm not the brightest person in the world. I don't pretend to be, but I worked incredibly hard. I left school with very good A-levels. Hard to believe, I know, but I had a girlfriend or two who was pretty popular. Didn't have to deal with challenges of that kind. And when I was 15 years old, life got even better when I started to pursue my dream of becoming a professional sportsman when I was put on the Northamptonshire Academy. And when I was 18, my dream came true, because unlike my mates who went off on gap years around the world or to university, I left home, I signed a contract, and I started to get paid to do what I love. That summer things went really well for me, a lot better than I or I think anybody else expected. I got called up into the England under-19 team. I was playing with and against people that have been very successful, and I made the mistake at that moment of thinking, well, I'm sorted, I've made it, I'm going to be rich, famous, play on TV and get paid to do what I love. But then at the end of that year, I had a difficult decision to make, because on the back of my A-levels, I'd been offered a place at university, and I always thought I'd want to go to university. But of course now, having had a taste of it, I just wanted to play sport. But my parents, who were in education, they recognised the cutthroat and competitive nature of sport, encouraged me to continue my education by going to university. But also the university I'd been offered a place at was not only a brilliant university, but it had a centre of excellence for cricket, so it was perfect. So I could do both. So I arrived there at a place called Durham University in October 2006. I had a year left on my cricket contract, and I can honestly say my life was, as far as I was concerned, perfect. I'm here to talk about my addiction, and I haven't mentioned it once. The reason I haven't mentioned it is because, unlike a lot of young people nowadays, this wasn't part of my life in any way, shape or form, because you didn't have the same access and exposure that young people do nowadays. It wasn't something that any of my family or friends did. But at university I met different people, and I was introduced to it on a Saturday morning. I walked into a betting shop. I put a £2 bet, having never really placed a bet before, on a roulette machine. And 12 seconds later, I always say, £2 became £72. When that happened, and my life changed forever. I can never explain the feeling I got from that moment. I'd actually never have it again. I'd never had it before, sorry. I'd never have it again. The fact that all my mates around me went mad, did nothing for already sizable ego. We walked out the shop and they all asked me how I was going to spend the money. There's only one way I ever wanted to spend that money. I wanted to go straight back in there, do it again and try and turn it into even more money. But I didn't know what they'd say if I said that, so I lied. This had become a theme. I went back in there, I won a bit more money. I walked out that night feeling very pleased with myself, and I thought, well, that was fun, that was easy, I could make so much money from gambling. But what I didn't know is how quickly or easily you could become addicted to these things. What I didn't know is over the course of the next 13 years, between the ages of 19 and 31, not a single day went past where I didn't gamble, either online, in a shop or in a casino. During those 13 years, I'd have three worlds that every addict has, three worlds that I would try and keep separate from each other at first because I wanted to and it was easy, towards the end because I really needed to, but it became harder. But these three worlds would grow closer and closer together. They would crash and collide in a quite unthinkable way in March 2018, as I'll explain now. The first world was this, my career, my professional life. I carried on at university. The only thing that changed was suddenly something was part of my life that wasn't there before. I was different to a lot of people at university because money wasn't a problem, because I had a student loan, I had a generous mum and dad, and I was getting paid to play cricket. So I stupidly thought, well, I can gamble, lose some money, still afford to do what my mates are doing, so what's the problem? I also had a lot of time on my hands at university, unlike when I was at school or playing full time, and I spent a lot of that time doing these things, but I didn't think it was a problem until at the end of my first year at university I went back to continue my cricket career. But unfortunately now that distraction coupled with an injury meant that I spent more time doing these things, and at the end of that year I got sacked, I got released, and that moment in my life hit me so hard. And as a young person, you never really know how you're going to deal with moments like that in your life. And I used to think, well, I'm resilient, I will use it to motivate myself, I'll bounce back, but actually I wasn't. And I really struggled. But I'd been the person in life that had never struggled with anything. So I didn't want to admit to anybody that I was finding life difficult. I went back to university, I put on this facade that I didn't care, but of course deep down I really did. I still had plenty of money. I did it more and more because of the money and time. I was bright enough to get through my degree, so I graduated 2 years later with a 2-1 in history and politics from a very good university. I wasn't going to struggle to get a job, and nobody knew this was all going on because I was doing everything I needed to. I left university not knowing what I really wanted to do. So I followed the crowd, that's a lesson itself. I moved to London where I got a job in finance. I worked for one of the world's top insurance brokers. I lived with 4 mates in southwest London. I got paid a decent salary. But my problem now was I couldn't manage that money. I couldn't resist the temptations around me, because now I could gamble whenever I wanted to. I could drink whenever I wanted to. But also I now became motivated by money. The only thing that became truly important in my life was having money. That was partly because I was gambling so much, but also that was the culture and environment that surrounded me. So me being obsessive, when I sat at my desk, I worked even harder. And 10 months later, in December 2010, my life would change again, when on the back of being given a promotion, a pay rise and a Christmas bonus, I went out with my mates to celebrate. But before doing so, I walked into a betting shop. I put a £500 bet, which was the biggest bet I'd put on to that point, on a series of football matches. I walked upstairs and I started getting drunk with my mates. That night, £500 became £34,967. £35,000 is obviously a huge amount of money. It's more money than a lot of people earn in a year. It sounds like the best thing that could ever happen to anybody, let alone a 22-year-old guy starting up in London. But actually, what a lot of people don't realise is when you win is when you're most vulnerable. Because at that point, I thought I was invincible. I thought this would happen every time I did it. When it doesn't, well, it's bound to happen again at some point. In the short term, I stupidly thought it's money I don't need. But actually, the worst thing about it is it now was just like a drug. Because now if I didn't win that amount of money, it didn't give me the same feeling, the same rush, buzz, hit, if you like. And I started trying to win that amount of money every time I did it. I never told a single person in the world that I won that money that night, but I also lost it in 4 weeks. And when it was gone, I wanted it back, and I started trying to win it back, and then I started to lose it all. I started to find it really difficult, feeling guilty, embarrassed, ashamed, stupid. So I started to combat those feelings by drinking a lot of alcohol, by sometimes taking drugs in secret, and my life started to spiral in a very different direction. 6 months later, in July 2011, I recognised I needed to make a change, because I'd put on 3.5 stone in weight. I'd taken out 4 bank loans. I'd maxed out 5 credit cards, hadn't paid my last few months' rent payment on my house. And I thought, I've got to do something about it. So I did. I went home to see my parents. And my biggest regret in my whole life, despite what I'm about to tell you, is that day in July 2011, I sat opposite my mum and dad, and I didn't tell them the truth. I didn't tell them the truth because I was terrified. I didn't tell them the truth because I didn't want to let them down. I didn't want them to be angry with me. I didn't want them to be disappointed. And I certainly didn't want to tell them it was gambling, because I knew they wouldn't approve. So instead of telling them the truth, I said, look, I don't like London. I don't like my job. I've got to go and do something more rewarding. Being the amazing people they are, they said, okay, what do you want to do? And I said I wanted to become a teacher. I said I wanted to become a teacher for all the wrong reasons. I said I wanted to become a teacher because they were teachers. I knew if I said that, they'd be pleased. They wouldn't ask as many questions. I also thought if I changed my lifestyle and environment so drastically, it would get rid of the problem. And I moved to Oxford, where I got a job at a very well-known school, where I'd spend a number of years before moving to another school. And for a few weeks, it was a positive change. But then other things started to go wrong in my life, like happens. I had some relationship issues, some issues at work. I was in a very serious car accident where somebody died. And my problem was that every time I was faced with a problem, I never talked about it. And I ran away like any addict to what weirdly feels like a safe place, but it's the most dangerous place you can be. Because when you're doing these things, you don't engage with reality. But of course, it starts to catch up with you in other ways, as it did me emotionally, financially, but also professionally. Because I couldn't do my job properly. Because as a result of gambling, the money I got paid, my salary, would be gone on the first day of each month. I'd then think, well, how on earth am I going to pay off my debts, my bills, carry on living, carry on gambling? Started to borrow money in all sorts of ways. And then I would eventually make decisions at work that I'd regret forever, and would cost me my career, because I started to abuse my position as a teacher by approaching parents of pupils that I taught for money. I wasn't stupid. I knew that some of these people were very wealthy people. I took advantage of some good relationships, and I lied to these people who had the money to lend me. I promised to pay them back. I didn't pay a penny back. I'd gamble it all away. I'd eventually get found out, rightly so, but in the process I'd lose my house, my job, and nearly my life. I had 3 incredible opportunities in life, 3 potentially very successful careers that were ruined by my relationship with something that I know now doesn't need to be part of my life. My second world throughout this time were these people, my family. Family is absolutely everything to me now, but for 13 years it wasn't. I was so selfish. I was a liar, I was a thief, I was a manipulator. I stole hundreds of thousands of pounds from my parents. These people loved, trusted and respected me way more than they ever should have done. I made the mistake of thinking problems with addiction don't happen to people like me who went to a school like I did. They happen to people from broken homes, dysfunctional family backgrounds, troubled circumstances. It's not true. If it can happen to me, it can happen to anybody. And addiction really doesn't discriminate. And my third world was this, my biggest world, my addiction, the world that took over the other 2. What started as a bit of fun with £2 ended up with me transacting just shy of £2 million worth of bets online. I lost over £1 million that wasn't mine. I was a VIP member of 7 different online operators who flew me around the world to sporting events. I thought that sounded cool, glamorous. It fed my ego. I now realise it meant I was the biggest loser. When I finished, I had 76 different accounts opened up illegally in 63 different people's names. I took out 23 different bank and payday loans. I borrowed money off drug dealers, gangsters, and then turned to 113 different individual people. And I'd built up £500,000 worth of pure gambling debt that I've now got to spend every day for the rest of my life paying back. The money was bad, it was serious, and obviously it was the driver behind a lot of my behaviour. But actually, the worst thing about an addiction is the lie that you're living, the double life. I had lost my morals, my values, my principles. I was suffering from serious mental health issues. I had anxiety to the point I could barely walk out of my house. I had depression, I hated myself, the world, everything that I was doing. I just couldn't stop. And honestly, as a teacher, I portrayed to everybody completely the opposite image. I was also an insomniac. I didn't sleep through the night because I was either up in the middle of the night doing it, looking for money on the internet while my girlfriend was asleep so she didn't know what was going on, or just couldn't sleep because life had become stressful. And I knew I was going to get found out. And it happened. It happened in March 2018 when the headmistress of the school that I now worked at had understandably received complaints from some of the pupils that I taught, from some of my colleagues, and of course from some of the parents. I got called in for a meeting with an ongoing investigation, and I knew at that point, because I knew what was going on and what I'd been doing, that I was going to lose my house. I knew I was going to lose my job, and I knew I was potentially facing time in prison. So I walked out of that meeting, and of course what I should have done is I should have told someone. But the irony of a gambling addiction, which is actually the only thing that's different from all other addictions, is the only thing I ever thought was going to solve it is the thing that caused it in the first place. No alcoholic has ever tried to drink themselves sober. But as a gambling addict, I thought, you know what, all I ever need to do is win all the money back and it gets rid of the problem. And I tried. My problem was I didn't have any money, so I borrowed a large sum of money off somebody, and during the Cheltenham Festival in 2018, that was coincidentally that week, I tried to gamble my way out of it. I won, I lost. I can never explain how stressful it was. And then on the Thursday, when I started to lose the small amount of money that I'd built up, I panicked. And I put a series of speculative bets on that not even I thought had a chance. And I had one bit of luck that will never happen again. And suddenly the £10,000 that I'd started with at the beginning of the week was £58,000. That's an extraordinary amount of money. It can change most people's lives. But to me at that moment in my life, it honestly was worth nothing. It was the number in the top right-hand corner of a computer screen that had to be 10 times that amount. Otherwise, I was facing time in prison. So what I decided to do the next day out of pure desperation is the most stupid thing you could possibly imagine. But the only way I can justify it to anybody I ever speak to is by saying, weirdly, at that moment in my life, it felt like the right thing to do and it felt like my only option. I decided to put it all on one bet, one horse in one horse race, the Cheltenham Gold Cup in March 2018. If that horse won, I'd win that money back. Yes, I might lose my house and my job, but at least I can pay everybody back. I don't go to prison. If this horse loses, there's no way I'm telling anybody what I've just told you. I'm going to go and kill myself. I watched this horse race, sat in a history lesson. I had 18 boys sat in front of me. I sat behind my school computer, pretending nothing was going on. My horse is called Might Bite. It's in black and orange, furthest away from the running rail.
River, 5 or 6 lengths at least behind those to Road to Respect. Then Annabelle Flying Jacket and behind those. 2 fences to jump. Nico still holding on to Might Bite. Native River with a noseband on the right. The pair are still together. Second last, they touch down when they head towards the final fence. Might Bite nearest to us. Under pressure, the far side is the brave Native River. The 22nd and final fence. Native River just in front, the Might Bite. Up the hill they come. Native River by a length and a half to Might Bite in second place. Native River is fending off the challenger Might Bite. They run towards the line. The brave, the generous Native River in front. He's still holding on. He's made every yard. What a run.
I had a £58,000 bet on that horse called Might Bite that came second by that far. Ultimately, the best thing that's ever happened to me in my life was that horse coming second, but at the time it didn't feel like it because my whole world came crashing down. To cut a very long story short, having tried to or attempted to take my life in various different ways, I eventually arrived here at Slough train station, not far away from where we are now. One of the busiest train stations in the UK. I bought a £14.50 travel card with £18 I'd stolen off my girlfriend without her knowing, and I went and stood 2/3 of the way down that platform. I had 3.5 minutes before a fast train was coming through that station. It wasn't going to stop, and I don't need to tell you what was about to happen. As you can imagine, stood there, I had an awful lot going through my mind. But one thing that was going through my mind more than I ever had done before is that I had to tell someone. But who'd you tell when you'd been the person in life that had really struggled to talk to anybody about anything that was bad? After a bit of thought and for various different reasons, the only person I could bring myself to tell is actually my best friend in the world, who's my little brother. I didn't want to call him. I didn't want him to hear me in the state that I was in. That would be his last memory. So I sent him a message and I said, look, bro, this is what's about to happen. When he didn't reply immediately, my mind was so scrambled. I thought so little of myself. I thought, well, he must want me to do it as well. But actually, I realise now he's trying to work out what on earth to say. And having tried to call me, he then sent me a message, and that message essentially saved my life. And it was so simple, because it finally made me think about other people, not just myself. He said this, he said, look, he said, unless you've just murdered somebody, he said, nothing's that bad. He said, please don't you dare do what you're about to do. He said, whatever is going on in your life, he said, please just talk to us. He said, be brutally honest. And he said, I promise you we will support you if we can. And that is ultimately all I needed to hear. I stood back, I didn't do what I was about to do. I was against those railings in floods of tears, people looking at me, some laughing at me, you couldn't make it up. But I honestly didn't care, because I can say it was the first time in a very long time I felt real, and I could get the help that deep down I knew I needed and was desperate for. I took myself home. It took me a long time. By the time I'd got home, my family were there. I can never explain how difficult the conversation I had to have with them was, but do you know what? Their reaction was so different to how I thought it was going to be. The whole time I was going through this, I'd played it in my head that they were going to go mad, they were going to disown me. They didn't. They recognised I had a problem. They were glad I was still here. But the one thing that will stick with me for the rest of my life is they looked me in the eyes and they said, look, we promise to support you, but you have to play your part in this as well, and you got to stop. I just didn't know how to. On the Monday morning, I didn't go to court. I resigned from my job and I went to rehab. I started a treatment program which took about 3 months on Holly Street in London, having help for an addiction I didn't know existed when I was younger. I certainly didn't think happened to people like me. But those 3 months during which I had to have a long, hard look at myself in the mirror, I had to accept what I'd done and own it, and of course understand it. Have allowed me to stand on my own 2 feet again and move forward with life, and I haven't had a bet since. I decided to go very public with my story because I felt it was important to raise awareness, reduce stigma, but also change people's perceptions of this particular addiction, because too many people said to me along the way, it's not drugs, it's not alcohol, it's gambling, you're an idiot, why don't you stop? I've still got an awful lot of debt that I'll be paying back for pretty much the rest of my life, but when anybody tries to feel sorry for me now, I remind them that I've got more money than I've ever had, and that's good enough for me, it's mine. I engage with sport just as much as I used to, but just in a different way, and that was one of my fears. But actually now I love it more than I've ever done, and for the right reasons. I've got relationships back with people that I put through hell, mentally and physically, and it wasn't until I stopped that I realised the impact that my addiction had on the people close to me. And a year ago, my life got even better when I became a dad. And I've been able to reflect a lot in that time. And I realise now I can do the best and most important job in the world, and that's being a parent. For most of my life, I couldn't look after myself, let alone try and look after somebody else. I came out of rehab and I decided that I wanted to share my story with young people. Not because I think I'm some sort of hero who's going to change the world, because I'm not proud of who I was or anything that I did, but because I don't want one person to go through what I did. And I looked back on my time in education, both as a student and as a teacher, and time in a professional sports academy, and I recognised that people did talk about addiction, but it was almost always substances, things that you put in your body, drugs, alcohol, smoking, all really important topics that can impact people's lives, but usually physically. Nobody ever talked to me about the three things at the bottom there, three things now that young people are engaging with more than ever before. Three things that are addictive, they're all actually designed to be, but three things where the signs are much harder to spot in people because they're often hidden or invisible, as they were for me. But three things that people need to take really seriously. Young people need to monitor their own relationship with, but parents also need to be very vigilant about. Gambling itself is now a problem in society. It doesn't just affect the individual who's doing it, it has a significant impact on other people, and so actually education and awareness around it is essential, even if it's not you that's doing it, for people in your lives. The statistics are pretty frightening in terms of prevalence, participation rates, because of the normalization of it, and actually now a lot of young people are doing it more than kind of ever before, and there are a lot of young people gambling before they're legally allowed to do so, and that comes in many different forms and guises, as I'll talk to you about now, but many of which people don't actually realise go on or are gambling. Obviously the world is a very different place to what it used to be, even to when I was growing up, and nowadays there are three main reasons why this is such a big problem. The first is, of course, the accessibility that young people have. It's unprecedented. You can place a bet, play on a video game, or access a social media platform in 6 seconds on these things that everybody lives their whole life on. Therefore, anybody can do it anytime, any place, at a click of a button. These young people have also been brought up in a generation that is all about instant response, instant reaction and gratification. These things give it to them, therefore it's incredibly appealing, but they're also all very addictive. The problem is, as well, is when it becomes a problem, as I found out as someone who is addicted to my phone, is that it lives in your pocket. You can never get away from it. The second is what we call the convergence or link between video gaming and gambling. There are a lot of young people nowadays who spend way too much of their time playing video games. I don't believe that video games are evil, they're the devil, as some people would say. I understand why young people play them, but what they do need to understand and respect is that these games are addictive, and they're actually designed to be that way. But a lot of the things that are built into these games, things like loot boxes, packs, and I'll share with the school a lot of information about these specific things that are built into these games, are, in my opinion, unlicensed, unregulated, forms of gambling. They're normalizing this behavior and in many ways trying to groom the next generation of addict. It comes in so many different forms and guises now. You couple those two things with the fact that young people through social media, which in itself can be addictive, are getting exposed to things that they didn't used to be. But also now approximately 20% of all adverts are gambling related adverts. So therefore it's everywhere we look. You can't get away from it. The temptation is there. Let's also not shy away from the fact that some of the advertising is very predatory in its nature. It's trying to hook you in, young people in. And it can only take one bet, as I found out. As I said, it comes in so many different forms and guises, many of which young people and their parents don't actually appreciate are forms of gambling, some of which they're able to access at a younger age. They're actually some of the most addictive forms, which is madness in itself. It can affect people in many different ways, and actually the impact of anything that you do online can affect different areas of your life. And obviously people think of gambling particularly and they think of money. Actually the wider impact my relationship with the online world had on other areas was far more significant. The impact it had on my mental health, the way I thought, felt, acted, the fact that I never slept properly meant that I couldn't make good decisions, I couldn't perform. And actually one thing that is vital is that young people, with the support of the people around them, protect their sleep. Because too many young people and adults to a degree are up in the middle of the night scrolling through social media, playing video games, gambling. And actually that is not healthy. And of course the impact it has on people around them. What does vulnerability look like? Again, these will all get shared with you. As I said, it's very difficult to spot the signs in somebody when it comes to an online addiction. But actually there's three ways that you can spot a problem. The first is what someone might be saying, and these are kind of key characteristics or signs that I guess I would have been displaying on a day-to-day basis. What someone might be doing, these are some of my actions or behaviours that obviously increased, and of course how somebody might be feeling. But the really difficult thing when it comes to finding out how somebody might be feeling is they have to give you that, but also often mood can manifest itself when it comes to these types of addictions in very different ways, because the nature of something where you win and you lose or goes well or not so well is that you kind of go on a bit of an emotional roller coaster. So sometimes people find it hard to put their finger on it because they can't quite work out, because it doesn't manifest itself in the same way, and that's a sure sign that it might be one of these things. Summarize, these are warning signs that you can look out for in yourself or anybody. One of the messages that's really important is that early intervention is possible. The mistake that most people make is they wait, whether it's in themselves or somebody else, until the problem gets really bad, and then they think, okay, this is bad, I need to do something about it. Actually, the sooner you address a problem, the less big or bad the problem will become. But ultimately, the only way you can deal with a problem of this kind is by getting support. And often that needs to be professional support. If you do recognize somebody in your care that is struggling with an online addiction, obviously the first thing is to acknowledge that there is a problem, and at that point to encourage treatment. My experience with parents is that too often when it comes to something that's online like this, is they think, okay, we should be able to deal with it ourselves. It's not like drugs or alcohol, but actually professional support is really, really important, and specific support for that addiction. So actually encouraging professional treatment is really important. Understanding that that problem doesn't just disappear as soon as they've had that support or that treatment, that it's something that you deal with, as I know all too well, for the rest of my life, but I'm able to manage that better, and providing that kind of ongoing support. But also make sure that if you have somebody in your care who is struggling with this kind of thing, is actually look after yourself as well, and don't be afraid to lean on support. I know that some parents worry about talking to other people about their child's relationship with these things because of what other people would say or think, and that in itself is not right or helpful. Some advice, some kind of key messaging that I think we need to try and instill in young people, and I know that at a school like this with somebody like Christine at the helm are things that are being kind of drummed into them, which I think is really important, and you can play your part at home. The first is around this kind of narrative when it comes to young people, that when it came to addiction or mental health, people always thought, oh, it will be that person. Actually, more often than not now, it's often the people you least expect it to be. And it's keeping an eye on everybody, but also not pigeonholing people as, oh, they'll be okay because everything's good, they're high achieving. Actually, those people are vulnerable for reasons like I explained. When things do go wrong, often they find that really difficult to deal with. So please never assume. Messages around control and moderation. The second you tell a young person not to do something, the first thing they'll do is do it. So actually it's kind of teaching them that it's about being in control. It's about finding a balance, and it's about moderating how much they do something. I live my life now by a motto: a problem shared is a problem halved. I was the young person in life who never talked about problems. That's because I thought showing vulnerability I thought it was a sign of weakness. It's not, it's a sign of strength and courage. And the more we can model vulnerability as adults to young people, the easier I think they will find it to do the same. Please be aware of if your son, daughter has what I have, which is often termed a very addictive personality or nature. They can be some of the most successful people in the world, very, very high achieving, but they are more vulnerable when it comes to addictive substances and behaviours. Helping them have that self-awareness, recognise that in themselves and manage it going forward is really important, but too often it's seen as a weakness rather than as a strength, which it can be. But also dealing with adversity, as we all know, or failure or making mistakes is not easy. And they're the points where I would encourage you as parents to really look out for young people in your care and monitor their relationships with addictive substances and behaviours, because so often that can be the catalyst or cause for problems, as you heard from my own story. These are some kind of healthy coping strategies that I would encourage young people to try and build into their lives away from what they do online. There's a time and a place for that, but it's finding a balance and actually making sure that you as parents do ensure that they are doing other things other than everything online. There is no type, as I just mentioned, and often it is the person you least expect it to, but there are certain characteristics which do mean somebody is more vulnerable, particularly when it comes to these types of addiction. And the one I want to pick out more than anything else is that kind of competitive nature. Gambling and gaming for younger ones is like a drug for competitive people, because ultimately it's all about winning and losing. It gives you that on tap, and therefore when you do it, if you're like me and very competitive, if you ever lose at something, you won't stop until you win, and then you think, oh well, I've won now, I'll stop. But that's like a drug. And so if you do have a son or daughter who's incredibly competitive and you know they do these things,
Thank you, Patrick. Now, I've heard your story before, but I still found that so harrowing to listen to. I think from being a mum, as well as a head teacher as well. So thank you. So
no, it's a pleasure.
You're constantly, you relive that experience. And when you see that horse race, that must just bring it back every time, that moment. Yeah,
it's funny. I often get asked by the pupils, how do you feel watching that race? I think because I've seen it that many times. Yeah. It's often like a break in my talk where I can have a drink. I try not to even engage, but actually, even today when I was doing it, I was looking out in the audience, so many of them had their hands across their face, and you realise actually, the impact that moment has.
Absolutely. And I noticed that if you've got a question for Patrick, please send it through. I haven't got my phone with me, so I can't check my email, but I will pick up emails afterwards as well. But I think, from, thank you. Well done for being a dad as well. Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, it's amazing.
Well, that's fantastic news. Really, brilliant. Thank you. But going back, because I think, as a parent, there is so many, the online dangers now with gambling are far worse than ever that you might have had to. You're relatively young. I didn't even have the internet, but what they're going through and the games they're going through. And do you think parents see the dangers of what's there?
I think they do, but I think what's really difficult, particularly around these topics, is that it changes so quickly. There are so many things that come on the scene, so many trends, so many mediums of which you can do it. It's actually really hard to keep up with. But also, and I'd use my parents as an example here, particularly when it comes to something like video gaming. I never played video games, but my parents, if we did, they would find that really difficult to understand, because they'd think, well, why on earth would somebody want to play on a video game? But actually, it is what these young people love doing and want to spend their time doing. So it's almost having an element of respect and respecting that rather than kind of dismissing it. But you do have to try and keep on top of what's going on. And a lot of these video games, and again, there's a time and a place, and they actually in some ways can have a very positive impact on somebody's life, and they do have benefits in moderation. But I do think too many parents think, oh, it's just a football video game. It's fine, they can play on that, and they can play on it as much as they like without actually looking at what's involved, what's going on. So never judge a kind of game by its cover.
And I know in the past we've had a few parents where their card has actually been attached to a game as well, and some of the children have actually purchased tools or whatever within the game and ended up with huge amounts of money spent on their credit cards. I mean, have you come across that with people?
Yeah, I mean, it's all too frequent, and I think that's one of the most important things, is that you don't leave yourself open to that. As I've hopefully just sort of articulated, these games are designed, and the things within them are designed to be addicted. So if you give your child unlimited access to something, they will just keep doing it in most cases. So actually you need to make sure you put those measures in place to protect yourself. But also I think it's really important that if you have made that mistake, you're certainly not alone. No. You are not the only person. But I think that's where talking about these things with the young people is really, really important as well, and helping them understand why you're making some of the decisions, why you're putting some of the restrictions in place. I think is helpful, because it kind of takes them on that journey with you.
Do you think there's enough regulation over children's games?
No. I mean, gambling, it baffles me that gambling is more heavily regulated than gaming. It's not regulated nearly enough or as much as it should be, and it's still self-regulated, which in my opinion will never ever work. But the fact that there's nothing when it comes to gaming that's stopping a young person spending an infinite amount of time or money on a game, that just blows my mind. And I really do hope that they do start putting things in place to protect people. In some countries, Belgium, I know, in Holland, these loot boxes, these are viewed as a way or as a form of gambling. So they're actually regulated in the sense that you're not allowed to buy one unless you're 18. In this country, I know 6-7-year-olds that are buying them and spending huge amounts of money on them.
And the other thing is, which was quite surprising because I'm normally asleep by 10 o'clock at night, but on the odd night when I have been awake and I've been channel flicking, I was really shocked, probably about a year ago, to see there was actually roulette games on like mainstream TV going on, but they were constant. It was one after the other. Yeah. I mean, what do you think? What's going on here? Why is the government allowing this kind of blatant advertising of gambling?
It is frightening, and I think I'm not difficult for people to believe, but I'm not anti-gambling in the sense that I recognise that there are people that do it and don't have a problem with it. So I don't think banning it is the problem. Where I have issues is around the volume, particularly of advertising. We've reached saturation point. It's madness how many adverts there are, the exposure that young people are getting to it, and as a result, the normalisation. We need to find more of a balance, but also the government need to do more. But the problem is they're not, because they make so much money from it. So ultimately, for as long as it's about money and the financial side of things, I don't see it getting any better. And that's the really difficult bit. But I know that a lot of people, through the work that I do, I know a lot of people are becoming, particularly parents, are becoming increasingly frustrated by the volume of advertising and sponsorship. And I think rightly and justifiably so, because I think it has gone past the point of any form of sort of balance. And as I said, some of it is predatory in its nature. It's things like online casino games and slots. They are addictive products, and often the industry is trying to drive people, particularly young people, towards them, because that's ultimately how they make money. And that doesn't sit right with me.
It's almost a glamorising it as well, isn't there? I mean, some of the adverts that you see targeted at probably particularly at groups of our society, which are glamorising something that's going to lead somebody into something that they can ill afford to do. Well, no one can, afford to gamble on a large scale, but it just feels very sad that there's no regulation there or support for people who might be taken in by the glamorous side of gambling.
Yeah, absolutely. Often the picture that's kind of portrayed is very different to reality, as I know all too well. But as you just said as well, there are certain things, like if you watch certain programs now, the advertising is kind of targeting a certain audience. So when a gambling advert pops up for a program that might be largely associated with young women watching it, it will all be related to bingo or slots, because they know that that's what they're interested in. And it's quite scary. So it'll be interesting to see with the Gambling Act review having happened. Everything takes way too long. There are small steps and measures being taken, but nowhere near enough. Or things that aren't really meaningful, that aren't going to make much of a difference, in my opinion.
But what you said about sharing the problem is a problem halved. That is the thing, isn't it? And I think as a parent, it's really hard. You can't kind of comprehend sometimes when your children aren't telling you the truth. And that is the shame, isn't it? And that it's something so terrible that you can't tell your parents, but you can.
Yeah,
can't you?
Absolutely.
You can tell them anything, and I think parents, we have to just open up to our children and, nothing, as your brother said, unless you killed someone, nothing is worth that, is it?
And you're absolutely right, and it's something now as a parent, I want to have a relationship where my son can be honest with me about everything. And I think it's probably the bit that my parents found the hardest. I don't criticise them about much. They're amazing people, but I don't think a day goes past where they don't think to themselves, like, why couldn't he talk to us about it? And I've tried to explain that most of that is on me, but there are certain things and perceptions wrongly that I had which prevented me from doing so. So as a parent, I think the most important thing is trying to break those barriers down and can reduce or remove that judgment that so often comes with these things, and also things like if they do make mistakes, they do things that are stupid, there is a temptation to get angry, and you understand why, but the impact that can have. So I think a really truly transparent relationship is probably the most powerful one. And
everything you went through, it can, as you say, it can happen to anyone, and your reactions were quite typical. That's how people would react in your situation, and parents would probably think, why couldn't you have taught? But I understand that. I get that. I've been young too. I'm also a parent, so and it's just that you just got to encourage our young people that no matter what that problem is, it's not something that can that we can't fix.
Yeah, absolutely. And I am very passionate about kind of suicide as a topic, because as somebody who's been there, it's just happening far too much in the world, but particularly amongst young people, and that needs to change. And a lot of it would be prevented by people talking and telling somebody. And in my experience, that was the difference.
Yeah. Well, look, you haven't got any questions, but I'm sure I've got some comments that will be in my inbox afterwards. But it's really lovely to see you. You look tremendously well. It must be fatherhood.
Well, I don't know about that. I talk about having 7 to 10 hours of sleep.
Yeah.
I can't say that's been happening for the last year, but it's the best thing in the world. So,
right. And I will read your book. And I hadn't realised you've written a book as well. So I will get your book as well. And I know you've got your own company, and we wish you well.
Thank you.
And we'll see you in another couple of years. Because believe it or not, these kids pass through too quickly. And we need to keep that message coming through.
Well, thanks so much for having me. I've had a great day.
Great. So thank you, Patrick, and have a good weekend. And I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.